Charlie Craig, and I work for Learning Network Educational Services, just like the wonderful Anna Lane. While I am not the lead literacy person on our team, literacy is an area of passion for mine as a former junior high language arts teacher. But this particular topic of morphology has become a little pet project, a little pandemic pet project in the last couple of years. So I'm excited to do some digging and exploring and really playing around with words and language as we move forward throughout this year. Lana, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I also work with the Learning Network Educational Services here in Alberta. I am the literacy consultant for the North Consortia here. But as Charlie has said, morphology is definitely a passion project for her. And so what a gift we have to be in a room together to work through words. So she will be leading much of this because there's a lot of learning to be done for sure on my end, but it's a wonderful project to have.
This notion of morphology, the study of words and the parts that we put together to build words, is absolutely an explicit portion of the curriculum from K to 6. And while we know that K to 3 is the one that's being implemented this year, 4 to 6 is in its final version. So the changes are not happening to that, and you can look forward. And in the speaker notes of the slide deck, which I will also send the link with the recording, you will see the actual pieces that are mentioned in the curriculum. And so every grade from grade 1 to grade 6 has some kind of morphology work that's expected of them. And unfortunately, because maybe we didn't experience more than a worksheet when it comes to understanding morphemes and how we put word parts together, we default into that as a structure to teach this understanding in this work. And that isn't necessarily the most engaging way to hook kiddos into these kinds of conversations. And I'm not saying that their worksheets are bad. There's a place for pen and paper practice. I would like us, though, to maybe lean into things like oral language development, having conversations with one another as a tool to tease out and see what their understanding is and build understanding around morphology as you work through these outcomes in the curriculum. What makes a word a word? How do you know what a word is? So sounds put together to make meaning. There's some kind of an understanding. There might be some syllables, some sort of visual representation, something you're making sense of. It might be easier to engage in this conversation with a reference. So if I looked at this chart, or if I had this chart in front of me, what makes CAT a word, but SH not a word? Well, and this one here, interestingly enough, this here isn't a word, but if it was capitalized, we consider it a word. So Kyla mentions there's some sort of consonant vowel situation going on. We might see prefix, base, suffix. Something like this, we have a symbol, we agree upon its meaning, but it's not made of letters, right? If you were looking from an alien who doesn't understand, or if you ask this of your students, they might see, well, there's spaces. That's how we tell a word apart in a sentence. There's spaces on either side of the word. And I know that what's ever sandwiched in the spaces, that itself is a word. The great thing about language is that a word is a word when we agree upon its meaning. There's a collective agreement about it. And our words and our language evolves over time, which is another layer to what makes this super interesting. Growing up, if someone said that that was sick, I would assume it meant it was ill, not cool or tricky or fantastic, as someone might say now if they saw a sick move, or I'm old. Like, I don't know if that's what kids say anymore, but you get what I'm trying to say. Language evolves. So once we have a sense of this idea of a word, we can move on to understanding word families. Now, this is where, again, we get a little tricky going on here, because when we're talking about a word family, we're talking about something that has a common root and a common base element. We're not talking about rhyming collections. So when we're in the world of morphology and we're talking about a word family, we're not talking about the at family. Cat, bat, rat. They do not live in the same family in morphology because they don't share a common base element, which is the part that we bridge out. And I'll explain this with an example here in a second. And they don't share a common root or history to it. You can have words that are related through their root, and they would come to the family reunion. But who sits on the picnic blanket with you has to be related and connected through the base and the root, both parts. Okay, so what do I mean by that? If we look at the word please, and then we look at these 12 choices here with it, we can ask ourselves, do they belong in the word family of please? So if I look at the word happy, I think we could agree very quickly, no, happy does not belong in the please family. Plea would be interesting. But when I think about pleading for something, I think like begging. And to me, that's not connected in meaning to please. Maybe, spoiler alert, they're connected to their root word, because they totally are. But as far as everyday meaning goes in conversation, I wouldn't say that they're connected. Which word could you pull out of this 12 that you would say is in the word family with please? It's got please, displease, pleasing, unpleasant, pleasurable. So if we've taken please as a base word and we've added some affixes to it, maybe even a connecting vowel or connecting letter of some kind. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because if we think about the word family and we're saying that if placer, if we're at the plate or placere, seriously, I don't speak Latin, so feel free to correct me. If this is the family reunion of the placere Latin root, all of these words would be invited. But if each family got their own picnic basket and their own picnic blanket, and maybe it was color-coded, those 12 words would be sorted in this way. So please, pleasurable, pleasing, displeased, and pleased are all part of the same word family. And that particular word family belongs to a larger group of this Latin root. I didn't realize that placate and placid were connected historically to the word please. Like, I didn't necessarily put that together in my head. Nor did I put together plea and please as in more than one plea. Interesting, like, fun fact here, the E that is at the end of please is actually what we would call a marker. And so the final non-syllabic E, which we have all sorts of fun names for when we teach school, right? The bossy E, the helper E, but it does more than be bossy and be helpful. But this particular role that it's playing right now is to differentiate the word please, please, as in please and thank you, with this word over here, pleas. So we call that a plural canceling marker, because this E is put here so that we don't think it's just more than one plea, like over here. We do the same thing with the word nurse, N-U-R-S-E. The E is on there so that when we're reading, we don't pause and go, huh, what's a ner? And why is there more than one of them? It's a nurse. The E is there so we don't have our little brains get confused about whether that word is plural or not. House is another example of the E doing that job, where it's canceling out the plural and making it easier for our brains to understand the meaning of the way that it is spelled, because the primary function of English spelling is to communicate meaning. So let's look at the word love. Love, with a definition or background information of care and desire. Which of these words, and you don't necessarily have to list them all, give me 2 words that you would put on the picnic blanket with the word love. Loving would absolutely fit as one of the words, because we have taken L-O-V-E, we have added the suffix ing, and it's being rewritten as L-O-V, replace the E, ing. A door would not be invited to the picnic blanket, because while it might share a root or like a meaning, it doesn't share that same base element of L-O-V-E. Similarly, hug does not share L-O-V-E. So on some level, we're looking for the letters, inside the word. You'll notice here that there's a couple of examples where I can see the word love. I look at the word G-L-O-V, and I can see love inside of glove. Why is glove not part of the love, L-O-V-E family? The meaning's not related. Another way that you can look at this is to take it apart. And is the letter G by itself a known prefix? No, not in English. I don't even know if in any language it exists as a single letter prefix. So that's another way that you can take it apart. Same with the word clover. I could see love in it, but is the letter C a prefix? No, it's not. Interesting enough, the word pullover is a compound word, pull over, going together, 2 base words. Again, I could see the word love in there, but is PUL a prefix that we're familiar with in other words? Does it share the same meaning? No, one is a coat or a sweater, and the other one is a feeling. The other way that you can do this activity is to start with any sort of a word and ask the students to build out that word into a family with all the words that they can think of that are connected with this. So if you're not familiar with this book, Patchwork, it is gorgeous. Like school library, classroom library, all the libraries should have this book. And it's talking about how, how people might initially see us isn't all who we are. And I read it with my 2 boys, and by the end I was like, this is so beautiful. They didn't quite see the emotional piece to it, but I was moved. So this is just a small segment from it. You are sounds plucked from all the places you've been and all the people you've met and all the feelings you've felt. You are blues and pinks and loneliness and laughter, mismatched scraps accumulated over time and stitched together into a kind of patchwork. So what I would do with a poem, with a page out of a picture book, is put it up for the kiddos to see after I've read it aloud, and I would ask them to pick a word, any word. Some words are going to be more conducive to building word families than others. You're only going to get so far with the word the. So for those little kiddos, you might say that, well, I need you to pick a noun, or I need you to pick a adverb or an adjective so that you can peel it back further. So here's a sample of what this could look like. I picked the word mismatched. To make the word mismatched, I believe, I hypothesize that it is MIS, the prefix, MATCH, match, is the base word, and then the suffix ed is added. So knowing that the base of mismatched is the word match, I use that to build out my family. So when I saw the word match, I thought of match, mismatch, matches, matched, unmatched, or unmatched, matching, rematch, and so on and so forth. You know, you've got 15 minutes, throw a hunk of text up on the board and say, pick a word. How do you think it's built? What other words do you think are related? Because in that conversation then, with that me of picking patchwork, which is a compound word, I've already introduced 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 other words from one word. So if we're talking about building vocabulary and building awareness around vocabulary through morphemes and morphology, which is totally the point of the curriculum, we need to shift how we look at words and look at word study. Here are some possible action items for next meeting. Have a conversation with your kiddos about what makes a word a word. How do we know that what we see on the page is a word? And start to unpack their thinking around that. I think it would be a fascinating conversation to have with kids, whether they are early learning kinders or all the way up into high school. Sometimes you have to go way back to those beginning conversations to see if they can really explain something they just take for granted as knowing. Then have a conversation or an activity with your students where you're talking about word families. So you could do it one of two ways. You could present them with a series of words, which what I would do with those charts is each of these would be on a cue card, and I'd have them in a literal bag, and I would be pulling them out one at a time and saying, does this word fit with this family, with the love family? How do you know? Does it not? Okay, it's going over here. And I would be having that conversation. Or do what we just did. Offer a segment of text, have them pick a word, and then think of all the other words that they can build into that family, and then have them share that out with their classmates. Because then, as Jamie pointed out in her comment, a conversation ensues around, I was wondering if this word is related to this word, or if it's connected in some way. There's going to be a group of other kids who picked the word accumulate, just like there's going to be another group of kids who picked the word blue. It creates multiple entry points into the activity because kids are going to select a word that they're comfortable with. And whether they pick a word and only come up with one other word that's connected to that word, or they come up with 20 other words that's connected to that word, they're gathering and having some sort of an engagement with the task. Over time, as it becomes part of how you think and approach language, it becomes easier and easier to do.